Now, when a lot of folks think of the music business, their mind probably goes to the big three: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You know, life on the road, loose women, recording studios, one big party. But we all know that egos rule rock and roll. And one of the biggest reasons bands break up is over songwriting credits. Because song publishing is where a big chunk of a successful rock star's income comes from if you're creating and performing original music. But you know, it's not always about money. I mean, it's only human nature, and musicians certainly aren't unique in the fact that usually people want to be given credit for the work that they do, regardless of the size of the contribution. And you can look no further than guitarist Bob Kulick, who did some uncredited session work for Kiss back in the 1970s, and it seemed to stick in his craw that he was not credited right up until his death in 2020, with Bob appearing on numerous podcasts telling anyone who'd listen about his uncredited session work with Kiss, which may have contributed to some apocryphal stories about him performing on Kiss Alive 1 that came out after his death. Stories since debunked by Mr. Paul Stanley himself. But sometimes an omission from album liner notes can escalate beyond that of simple butt-hurt feelings and into out-and-out violence. Back in 2003, White Stripes frontman Jack White confronted fellow Detroit rocker Jason Stolzheimer of the Von Bondies at a Motor City nightclub over production credits on the Bondies' 2001 album Lack of Communication, which resulted in assault charges against White from what Stolzheimer described as an unprovoked attack in which the White Stripes guitarist punched Stolzheimer several times. But today I want to talk about rock and roll's Money Man and his beef with an easy listening icon that was never resolved and the threatened punch that never happened. So stick around. Cat Stanley Space Demons coming at ya. Now you might remember Eddie Money, the Money Man, the late rock and roll singer born Edward Joseph Mahoney in New York City in 1949, the former NYC police officer turned rock singer whose recording career began with his 1977 self-titled debut that included the hits Baby Hold On and 2 Tickets to Paradise. More albums and hits would follow, including songs like Take Me Home Tonight, his duet with Ronnie Spector, which was probably his biggest hit back in 1986, as well as other top 10 singles like Walk on Water, I'll Get By, and Her Tits Were Shakin'. Now, Money's career would continue with albums, concerts, and even a foray into reality television right up until his untimely death from esophageal cancer in 2019. But back in 1980, we'd see the release of the classic golf-themed comedy Caddyshack, which I probably remember most for Rodney Dangerfield's hilarious performance, including a memorable scene in the Pro Shop, a scene he would do a variation of in the 1986 movie Back to School, this time in a college bookstore. Also, movie featured Bill Murray's turn as a wacky groundskeeper. Chevy Chase, Ted Knight were also in the movie. Now, when the filmmakers of Caddyshack were looking for a theme song to play during the closing credits, they decided to turn to singer-songwriter Kenny Loggins, who at that point was probably best known for his work as part of the duo Loggins and Messina. My main song I know from them, Your Mama Don't Dance and Your Daddy Don't Rock and Roll. Although Loggins did have a hit single, This Is It, co-written with Michael McDonald, and the duet, Whenever I Call You Friend, with Stevie Nicks. But you know, at this point, it was before he'd become the go-to guy for movie soundtracks. You know, during the 1980s, he had that big string of successful songs for movies, including Top Gun, Footloose, you know, Over the Top with Sly Stallone, which also featured another song by Sammy Hagar called Meet Me Halfway. I remember it was a pretty big hit back in the day. And he had a successful song on the 1976 Barbra Streisand version of the movie A Star Is Born. And here's what Loggins had to say about that in his 2022 memoir, Still Alright, and how working on that movie with Barbra Streisand ties into how he got involved with Caddyshack. He says this: "My story about Caddyshack actually starts with a different soundtrack. Barbra Streisand's 1976 remake of A Star Is Born, for which I wrote the song I Believe in Love." And he goes on to talk about how he got to know Streisand's boyfriend, a guy named John Peters, who was beginning his foray into the movie business as a producer. And a few years later, Peters would contact Loggins to invite him to a private screening of a movie he was producing. And that movie, of course, was none other than Caddyshack. And though the film's soundtrack would end up featuring numerous artists, Loggins would go on to write 4 tunes for the movie. Of course, the most notable track that he'd contribute would be the film's theme song, a number called I'm Alright, which would reach the top 10 on the Billboard chart. And here's what Loggins would say about the recording of that song, I'm Alright. "I recorded the final version with a bunch of my regular players and one guy extra, which led to a decades-long beef. Eddie Money happened to be in the studio next to ours while we were recording, and I caught some snippets of him singing through an open door. Eddie had released a couple of albums by that point, but hadn't yet hit it big, and that was the first time I'd heard him. He was a terrific singer with a big, gruff voice that I thought would make a perfect contrast on I'm Alright. I asked if he'd mind stepping into my studio, and 20 minutes later, there he was, singing the lines, Cannonball It Right Away, and Man, You Make Me Feel Good. Unfortunately, when it came time to file the song credits, I forgot to list him. Shit! When the error was pointed out to me, I did all I could to rectify things by acknowledging Eddie in as many interviews as I could. I even sent him a note of apology, but that wasn't enough for him. I'm still not sure what he wanted. It was never a financial thing, but he sure did disparage my name after that. I wish we'd had the chance to straighten things out between us, but I never saw him again before he passed away in 2019. And yes, Eddie Money did have butthurt feelings about that for years to come. In fact, here's what Money had to say in 2014 about Kenny Loggins. Money says this about Loggins. He says, "The guy married his therapist, for Christ's sake," he says. "I don't really like the guy. His son, Crosby Loggins, was on a show with my daughter, Jessie Money, and he was very rude to my daughter. They were on Rock the Cradle, and I don't know how he won that show because my daughter was better than everybody." So Money goes so far as to be butthurt over some stupid reality show. I think that was the show where they had a bunch of famous singers and musicians, kids come on and compete to see who was the best. Apparently, Money was red-assed because Loggins' son defeated his daughter. But he goes on to say this about that I'm Alright song. He goes on to say this: "I'm not a big Kenny Loggins fan, and I never have been, because you know what? We were label mates on Columbia Records, and the guy never even gave me credit for doing the middle part of that song. That's what I call a scumbag." So he's talking about that song, I'm Alright, the Caddyshack song. And this guy, this is the website Cleveland Scene, goes on to say this. He says, "Management for Loggins, who has always been a nice guy in our experience, by the way, declined the opportunity to address Money's comments. And I guess earlier that year, Money was on a Cincinnati radio schlock jock morning show, and when the radio schlock jock made a joke about, hey, Eddie Money getting in the ring with a celebrity boxing match with Kenny Loggins, Eddie Money's response was, I'll tell you the truth. I'll knock him out in 20 seconds. Now, Eddie Money, I don't know. For all I know, he might have been a tough guy. I don't know. You know, I'm not a tough guy. I'm no expert on these tough guys. But, you know, I never really understood these kind of guys. If you are a tough guy and you're trying to advertise to the world what a tough guy you are you really gonna come out and challenge Kenny Loggins, of all people? Now, not to cast aspersions on Loggins, you know. I mean, for all I know, the guy could be a great street fighter. I don't know. Maybe he's an MMA expert. Maybe he's got a black belt in jiu-jitsu or whatever, you know. Maybe he can do that thing that what's-his-name does, Steven Seagal, where he flips the guys and all that stuff. I don't know. But something tells me the guy that did House at Pooh Corner, you know, Danny's song, my guess is, at best, he's probably a lover, not a fighter. But really, man, not to pick on Loggins. Like I said, I'm not a tough guy, but I don't get it. You know, you're trying to advertise what a tough guy you are. You're calling out Kenny Loggins, saying you're going to knock him out. Give me a break, Eddie. I mean, come on. Makes you wonder who else was on his hit list, you know. Maybe Dennis DeYoung, one of the guys from Air Supply. I don't know, man, but it sounds like Loggins seems like a nice guy. He seems like he reached out to Money, tried to apologize to him, gave him credit in interviews. Like he said, it's not a financial deal. It's like Eddie Money doesn't seem like he feels entitled to financial compensation. So I don't know what the deal was, why he was butthurt still about this situation so many years later, talking about knocking out Kenny Loggins in interviews. Give me a break, man. You know, I'm an Eddie Money fan. I actually like Eddie Money. You know, Eddie Money, he's one of those type of guys, you know, I don't think he really has a great album per se, something you look at and say that's a classic album. He's one of those guys, you buy the greatest hits record, you know, and it's there's not a bad tune on it. I think when I was in high school, I had Eddie Money's greatest hits on cassette. So I like Eddie Money. I'm a fan, and you know, Eddie Money, his big thing was here in Detroit, we've got an amphitheater, pretty famous, called Pine Knob. It's been around forever. Eddie's thing was every year when they'd open up Pine Knob in the spring for their spring-summer concert season, Eddie Money would always be the first act to do the first show every year at Pine Knob. So I like Eddie Money. Like I said, I've always liked his music, but in this instance, bit of a head scratcher here, dude. Why not pick on somebody? I mean, I don't know who the tough guys in rock and roll are. I really don't, but it seems like you could pick somebody a bit more formidable than Kenny Loggins. Again, not to cast aspersions, but what do you guys think? I mean, is Eddie Money, God rest his soul, kind of came off here. Bit of a dickhead in this instance. But I had never heard about this. I had just recently found out about this. I was actually listening to some Eddie Money. I was reading about him, and I kind of found out about this unresolved beef that he took to the grave. But it's kind of funny, you know, thinking of Eddie Money. I was thinking back to one of my first memories of Eddie Money. When I was a little kid, my mom had a friend, this lady who lived on the next block. Sometimes we'd go over there. She had a daughter who was about my older sister's age. So sometimes we'd go over to their house and just hang out, have a visit. And, you know, the older daughter and my sister would hang out. And she had a couple sons who were older than me. But I would just kind of bop around the house while, you know, my mom and her friend would be in the living room smoking weed or whatever. And I remember I was hanging out in the bedroom with my older sister and her friend. And I remember this chick, she was working on an assignment for school, and I guess the assignment was, so this is probably around 1982, 83, so I'd have been about 7 or 8 years old, just to give you some context. So she was working on an assignment for school, which was to pick a song and I guess write down the lyrics and then bring it into class, and I guess they would discuss it. Well, the song that she had chosen was the song Shakin' by Eddie Money, which I think was a popular song at the time, and I really got a kick out of it. Now, rather than cheat and just, find the liner notes of an album and copy the lyrics from the liner notes, this chick actually went to the trouble of recording this song off of the radio, and she was sitting down with the cassette player, listening back to this song and writing down the lyrics for this school assignment. And I really got a kick out of it because there's the line in the song where Eddie talks about her tits were shaking till the middle of the night. And as an 8-year-old kid, I really got a kick out of that. Like, yo, this song's got the word tits in it. Ha ha ha. And she's actually going to bring this song into school and use this for her assignment. This chick, who probably would have been about 13 years old at the time, I really got a big kick out of that. And this is 82, 83, so this was during a time where it was before explicit lyrics, really, before gangster rap and all that stuff. Now pretty much with lyrics, just about anything goes, even though on the radio they're censoring songs like Mama Kin by Aerosmith or Jet Airliner by Steve Miller. They're censoring the SH word out of those songs, which I think is silly because I remember growing up in the 80s hearing these songs, the uncensored versions, on rock radio. Mama Kin has the word shit. Big old Jet Airliner has a song about funky shit going down in the city. It wasn't until after the Janet Jackson wardrobe malfunction where I actually heard, I didn't realize there was a censored version of Jet Airliner where it goes, funky kicks going down in the city, which to me is fucking stupid as fuck, but since I grew up with the shit on the radio, but anyways, that's kind of my funny story, early memory of Eddie Money. Her tits are shaking till the middle of the night. So that's the video. Hope you dug it. What do you think? Is Eddie Money being a dick here? Or was he in the right? Or should he just let the bygone be the bygone with Kenny Loggins, the House of Pooh Corner, Danny's song, even though I ain't got money, I'm so in love with you, honey. And I'm glad you watched the video. Hope you dug it, man. And we'll see you next time.
Stanley the one-eared monster. Stanley the one-eared monster.
Who's here?